Hi, I'm Paul Mawson, General Manager of WWNO. We are thrilled to have you here tonight and also to have the folks from On Point here for this very special live taping tonight. And I know it's a little cold here, but in Boston right now, where the crew flew down from, it's 15 degrees up there, so I don't feel so bad. We're gonna be taping the show live for broadcast. It's gonna air on WWNO tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning, and nationwide as well, depending on your time zone. So we're very excited about that. I get to do the obligatory. All right, we all have cell phones. You need to turn them off because etiquette demands that. Also, we're recording, and it can be kind of disruptive, especially if you have a really obnoxious ringtone. We will stop the show and put the spotlight on you and make you an example. All right, we got a great show tonight. This is very exciting. We've been spending the day with Tom and the crew, and it's been a lot of fun. And we're very excited about what we have for you tonight. First, we're going to start with some music because it's New Orleans. So let's do that. And tonight we have three very talented musicians here to help get things rolling. So how about a big rousing round of applause for Josh Starkman, Elena Dennis, and Edward Anderson.
but ever and a day. Radio, telephone, movies that we may know may just be passing fancies and in time may go. But oh my dear, our love is here to stay. Together we're going a long, long way. In time, rockets may crumble, Gibraltar tumble, they're only made of clay. Our love is here to stay. It is oh so very clear, very clear. Our love is here to stay, not for a year, but ever and a day. The radio and the telephone, the movies that we may know, making a us be passing fancies and in time may go. Our love is here to stay. Together we're going a long, long way. In time, rockets may But, oh my dear, our love is here to stay. Together we're going a long, long way. In summer the rockets may crumble and Gibraltar tumble. They're only made of clay. Forever our love is here to stay.
Miss Elena Dennis. Miss Elena Dennis, y'all. Joshua Starkman on the guitar.
Mr. Edward Anderson on trumpet. Minor blues, you said C minor or C minor or something, right?
How about again for Joshua Starkman, the beautiful Elena Dennis, and I'm Edward Anderson. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you.
Mr. Edward Anderson, thank you so much. Good night.
Hey, how about a big hand? Edward Anderson, Josh Starkman, Elena Dennis. There is no shortage of musical talent in this city. We all know that, and it's going to be great that folks across the country are going to get to hear that. So thank you so much for that. Putting something together like this takes a lot of people and a lot of organizations, and we want to take a moment and just thank some of those here, especially the folks at Tableau, Dickie Brennan and Steve Pettis and Lauren Brower. Thank you so much for helping to put this on tonight. As far as, and also the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, Darren Crumpton over there, thank you for helping out. We also want to thank everybody here at Le Petit. Isn't this great? Doesn't this place look great? Cassie Worley, who's just been an inspiration in this whole process. Thank you, Cassie. I don't know. Cassie, are you here? Where is she? I can't see. All right. Well, anyway, if you see Cassie, tell her great. And also, chair for the La Petite Theater is Bruce Hofer. We want to thank him as well for doing this. This is a great theater. This is a New Orleans treasure right here. They've got shows going on. In fact, there's a show opening tomorrow night here. I'd like to be able to say that we had this set especially made for On Point. And maybe I'll just keep saying that, but it's also for the show opening tomorrow night. So check it out. It's great stuff and great things going on here. You know, WWNO, this is kind of a culmination of a couple of steps here. First of all was developing our news department, and we were able to do that with some support from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, and also from the Greater New Orleans Foundation here. And that helped us to get things kind of rolling. We were able to hire our first ever news director, Eve Troe. Eve, are you here? Stand up, Eve. Stand up. Take a bow. A bow, not a curtsy. Okay. I told Eve at dinner, I said, you're our first news director, and among all the news directors we've had here at WWNO, you are the best. That has enabled us to take the step, kind of a step to what we're doing tonight, which is expanded environmental and coastal coverage. And that has been made possible through some generous support from the Walton Family Foundation and also the Kabikoff Family Foundation. And we greatly appreciate that. That's how it happens. National and local working together. And it's the start of our environmental coastal initiative. We're going to be hiring a full-time environmental reporter to cover this topic here on the Louisiana coast, not only for us here, but also that we can also report for NPR nationally. So it's a pretty big step here. And tonight is a kind of a step in that direction, and we were very happy to be able to bring On Point here tonight for that. So, at any rate, thank you for coming out. I really appreciate it. I also want to thank from UNO, the University of New Orleans, Professor Yanis Giorgio, who him and Captain Mike helped us this morning take a little tour of the wetlands, and I'm sure Tom will tell you a little bit more about that. But how about a round of applause? I also want to thank our folks, Robert Carroll and Jenny Lawson, who worked tirelessly here, the WWNO folks, to make this happen. And there's more, but right now it's time for us to get on with the show. So once again, this is wonderful. I want to stress something to you though. Tomorrow this will go out to over 200 radio stations. 1.5 million people will hear this. So when Tom comes out here, I want you to blow him off the stage, all right? We want everybody to hear it all across the country. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, a stellar journalist in his right and wonderful radio host, and the man who hosts On Point. Ladies and gentlemen, Tom Ashbrook.
Very much. Beautiful. Beautiful. Hello, New Orleans. Thank you very much. That blows them off. That'll blow it. That'll blow it right across the country. Thank you so much for being here tonight. You're beautiful. Thank you so much for coming out. It's just wonderful to be in New Orleans, and we're so very, very happy to be with you. We're going to put on a full-fledged On Point show right here on stage tonight. We love taking On Point on the road. We've taken it all over the country, and it's great to be here in New Orleans and kicking off this wonderful climate and environmental initiative with WWNO. What wonderful hosts they are. Thank you, Paul, and thank you, WWNO, for having us down. Wonderful to be here. Wonderful. Wonderful. We love it. And thank all of you for coming out. When you support WWNO, you support something very important, and you support NPR reporters all over the country and all over the world, and we are all grateful for that. So for each of you who's here tonight, thank you very much for your support of public radio. It is a big deal in this time in the news media, and we are very grateful for it. I'm especially happy to be in New Orleans because we've got a long history here. I grew up on an old family farm in Illinois in the Midwest. And every springtime, whenever we could swing it, we'd pile in the family car after the lambing season was over and before planting season, and we would head down to New Orleans and Dauphin Island and the Gulf Coast. And I have such precious memories, and they come back every time I'm in the city, of those days way back then when this was a long time ago. This is in the 60s, and we were just little kids, and my little brother and my little sister and I, and we would run all around here, Jackson Square, down to the old morning call over here, and I remember dancing with my little sister at Preservation Hall till what felt like all hours. It was probably, 9 o'clock. The memories just go deep, and they're very dear, and it's wonderful to be with you again after all these years here in New Orleans. And so thank you for your hospitality. Thank you for having us here. I also want to thank Yanis Giorgio and Mike Brown, who are here tonight somewhere. Hey, Yanis and Mike, are you here? Stand up. Where are you? Where are you? I know you're here. I know you're here. Thank you. Hey, Yanis, thank you very much for a fantastic tour this morning. WWNO arranged this, and Yanis was good enough to step right up and do it. They took us out off Pontchartrain, out toward, right on out into Lake Borgne and through that huge new barrier you've got out there. And we really got an eyeful. We learned a lot about the infrastructure that's going in here and about the marshland on the other side and a lot of the issues. It's one thing to talk about them. It's another to be right out there on the water. So thank you very much, Yanis, for getting us out there. That was a real eyeful. All right, we're going to put on a show here tonight. And it, as Paul said, will go tomorrow all over the country. But, it's the real deal. I've got my director down from Boston, Dean Russell, with me right here. Sam Gail-Rosen, my producer, who's put all this together with so much work, and we've got a great panel coming out for you tonight. We're going to put on a show just as if it's going on air. The clock is here as my master, my mistress, as always, and I will obey it. So you'll feel me coming into these sections, coming out of these segments, so it can drop right into the NPR format and go out around the country tomorrow. I think you've got open ears for your issues here in New Orleans since Superstorm Sandy like you may never have had before, and we want to respond to that, and it's a great pleasure to be able to do that. Now, one thing, and Paul began to allude to this, but when we do a show in a hall like this, and thank you, Le Petit Theater, for having us. We're really grateful for this wonderful venue. Thank you, Cassie, thank you. But it will sound a little different. And the thing that makes sense of that, we're in this big open space, we're in the hall, is you all. Because your applause informs our listeners all around the country that that's what's going on, that we're in a hall. So, my folks want me to practice this with you one more time. You know, if you listen to Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, do you hear that? You know how they wump it up? We don't like to be outshone by the applause of Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. So let's get a little more, we're gonna try this one more time. We're gonna record this as well so we can just beef it up and beam it out. So when we come on, you're gonna hear me saying, as you may have heard a million times, I'm Tom Ashbrook and this is On Point, you know, blah, 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 blah. At that point, I'm gonna raise my arms like this and just need you to like tear it up. Can we practice that? Can we practice that? All right, you ready? Deep breaths, here we go. Okay, let's do it. I'm Tom Ashbrook, and this is On Point. Okay, you know how to do it. You got it. New Orleans gets it. I think we blew the equipment out right there. That's awesome. We love to blow the equipment out. All right. Without further ado, we're going to get going. After we go through these segments, and by the way, thank you to our wonderful musicians, Elena Dennis, Edward Anderson, and Josh Starkman. That was just terrific. Just wonderful. They're more mellow than me, I'll tell you that. Beautiful. We're going to set up right here, and we're going to get going. I want to invite I'll introduce them formally in a moment, but please welcome Jarvis DeBerry, Denise Reed, and Tommy Michaud. Come on out, my dear panelists. Come on, Jarvis. Make yourself comfortable. Denise, Tommy. WBUR Boston, I'm Tom Ashbrook, and this is a special edition of On Point coming to you from New Orleans. We are with a live audience at Le Petit Theater in the heart of the old French Quarter with our hosts, NPR member station WWNO. To our great audience here in New Orleans and listeners around the country, welcome to On Point. That's great. Gotta love New Orleans. Gotta love it. Thank you. We are in New Orleans talking about our threatened coastlines here in Louisiana and well beyond. After Katrina, after the BP spill, after Sandy. Now, in the age of climate change and superstorms, the rest of the country is waking up to a reality that Louisiana is already facing head on. Our coasts are changing with accelerating speed and sometimes fury. Where does the national conversation stand on how we live on and with our coasts, on how we're going to manage in this century? This hour On Point, threatened coastlines in Louisiana and beyond. We're recording this show before a live audience at Le Petit Theater in New Orleans, right next to beautiful Jackson Square. We've invited questions from our audience here and from listeners around the country online. We are loaded for bear, so let's dive in. We have three big Louisiana thinkers on coastal issues with us on stage. Denise Reed, one of the world's top experts on coastlines, wetlands, coastal restoration, and the interaction of humans and coastal systems, chief scientist at the Water Institute of the Gulf in Baton Rouge. Denise Reed, welcome to On Point. Wonderful to have you here.
Thanks very much, Tom.
Thomas Michaud, let's say thanks to Denise for being here. Great. Tommy Michaud is here, research scientist at the Institute for Coastal Ecology and Engineering at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. Also a big voice in Cajun culture and Cajun music, plays accordion in the Cajun band Le Frère Michaud, and his sons Andre and Louis are part of the Grammy-nominated Cajun rock band, the Lost Bayou Ramblers. Tommy Michaud, welcome to you.
Thank you.
Great to have you. And our friend Jarvis DeBerry is here, award-winning columnist for the Times-Picayune, NOLA.com. He was part of the Papers team that won the Pulitzer Prize for Public Service in its coverage of Hurricane Katrina. A friend of the show, Jarvis DeBerry, thanks for coming out. Great to have you right here. All right. The whole country has been watching for a long time now, since Katrina certainly, as New Orleans and Louisiana have grappled with these issues. And you know, we've got different messages coming to us. I mean, one is that huge campaign from BP saying everything's great down on the Gulf, beaches are all sparkling, everything's coming up roses. The other maybe is that beasts of the southern wild image of people really in trouble. Denise, which is it?
Well, it's both. I think that we have real problems down here in Louisiana. We've lost over 1,900 square miles of our coast during the 20th century. The BP oil spill just became another insult to the coastal system, and you know we'll be finding oil for a very long time in and around our coast. And people do live out there on the coast, and so we have lots of different things going here in Louisiana, and we really have to make sure, I think, that the 21st century is a little bit different from the 20th century, and perhaps a little bit different from that image in Beasts of the Southern Wild.
Yeah, Tommy Michaud, we had the show down here 1 year after Katrina, and the evidence of the destruction was just fierce at that time. It was everywhere. It was kind of still overwhelming. Walking around New Orleans today, I mean, it's looking pretty darn spiffy. But out on the water, you can see the challenges as well. How do you describe for the rest of the country sort of the health of this neck of the woods when it comes to the coast and its life and the city and the coastline now?
Well, the area is still very much alive and it's very much living. And the coast, our marshes, they are resilient. The people are resilient. So people say fragile wetlands. They're not really that fragile, but they've been impacted by a number of factors over the years, and which those factors have taken their toll on the wetlands. And so we've lost a lot of marsh. That is, it was converted to open water primarily. But the marshes are resilient, the organisms are resilient, and the people are resilient. So kind of like Denise said, it works both ways.
Jarvis, you know, right after Katrina, the destruction was so bad and the scenes of suffering were so bad. You could hear around the country, and we heard it on our air, sorry, but we're going to let that city go. That was said. Now, we had Superstorm Sandy, and it wasn't just down on the Gulf of Mexico, and it wasn't New Orleans, it was New York City and much beyond. And I wonder if that hit to the eastern seaboard and one of the most populous parts of the country has left you with a feeling of the country looking around at our coasts, at New Orleans in a different way.
I hope so. You know, I am not a cynic, and I hope that people can appreciate other people in danger without it actually happening to them themselves. But it seems like that is often necessary, that people have to see it come to their front door before they realize, oh, those people weren't just stupid to live in a place that could be hit by a storm. And I didn't wish Sandy or any other storm on anybody else, but I can appreciate, however, that it did get the message home to people who otherwise were oblivious to it.
Maybe more sympathy, maybe more fellow feeling, since it hit right there. Yes. Denise, in this century, what are we up against nationally? Not just the Gulf, we'll look at it, but nationally, on our coastlines, where we have so much industry and population and commerce and on, but we see the climate change, we see what's projected on sea level rise. What are we up against on American coastlines in this century?
Well, we're up against some real trouble. I mean, the predictions for sea level rise towards the end of the 21st century are not in inches, they're in feet. And so they're many feet. They're 3, 4, 5, 6, depending on where you are and what's specifically happening. The other thing to play into this, as you said, Tom, is that coasts are a really important system. Very large numbers of people live on coasts, and there are a number of things that go on in coasts that really cannot be moved. I mean, if you think about this country and its imports and exports and its role in global trade, you can't move the Port of New Orleans up to St. Louis and it still do the same thing. You can't move the Port of Long Beach or Miami or even New York and New Jersey. There are some
things. Those ships are not going to sail to Salt Lake City or St. Louis, for that matter.
You got it. And here in New Orleans, that is just a really important point. We're at the bottom of the Mississippi River here. It's the 6th largest river in the world. You know, in New Orleans, we see it every day, and you kind of forget.
About 100 meters from us, right?
Exactly,
here.
But you forget that this really is a world-class system. It's really one of the world's great rivers, and it's also a huge commercial artery. It really connects the heartland of the U.S. with the Gulf and essentially with the rest of the world. A lot of people don't realize that coal from Pennsylvania gets put on a barge and it comes all the way down the river and all the way down to South Louisiana, and then it gets put on a ship and it gets exported. We send corn and soybeans out. We bring in steel and coffee.
And multiply that by ports and harbors all over this country that are essential to that, just for starters.
Exactly right. Heating oil in New York and New Jersey, all these kinds of things that we rely on every day come in and out through our ports. And they're not, you can't move those. And in order for those ports to really work and operate on a day-to-day basis, people have to live there. People say, well, just move out. And frankly, it's not that simple. There are many things that we rely on that we need, and we have to work out how to make that happen. We have to work out how to have people living safely in places where they need to live to do the things that we need them to do. This is not just about beach houses. This is really about commerce and the way this country works.
Tommy Michaud, we have the sense now, after these years and our experience with more hurricanes, with Superstorm Sandy, of New Orleans and Louisiana in a way as a kind of canary in the coal mine. It hit hard and deep and furiously here first. We'll look more at the infrastructure, the economic issues, but it is not just the economy that gets hit. It's not just beach houses. I think, Tommy, you're very aware as a musician, as a man with Cajun heritage, it goes even to the culture itself. You start to unwind the coast, you can unwind a culture.
Yeah, the people of South Louisiana are very into the wetlands. I mean, the wetlands are part of their life, our life, and it's part of the culture. I mean, we've been here for several hundred years, even before when we were in Acadie, the part of southeastern Canada, we're now called Nova Scotia. Mm-hmm. But our people
before the
there,
Great Migration South.
Yeah, exactly. The deportation, le grand dérangement. Mm-hmm. And they were there for 150 years, but worked very closely with the wetlands up there, the Bay of Fundy, a lot of marsh work, water control structures, dikes, moved down here. And this was a paradise for our people, and they could get out in the wetlands and just make a living all seasons of the year, hunting, fishing, trapping, trawling,
and the same
crabbing.
here when they came to Louisiana.
That's what I'm saying. So word got out to the rest of the Acadian population who had kind of been scattered around on both sides of the Atlantic. They all came back here and regrouped. Not all of them, still some up in Canada, but
lose those wetlands and that hunting and that fishing and that food source and the cuisine that goes with it and the music that's built around it, and you start to lose a culture.
Exactly. It's all intertwined.
Did you fear, have you feared, have you seen that intertwining coming undone here? Could it happen in other parts of the country?
It has not come undone, but there is the danger there. Though we're a strong people and a strong culture, we've kept it together.
We are in New Orleans and very glad to be here talking about America's coastlands and trying to gather the experience of Louisiana, this part of the world which was hit so hard, which has responded on a very large scale, which has big plans for further response as the rest of the country begins to look at its own coasts, its own plans for a century in which we are certain to have significant sea level rise. We don't know how much yet, but very likely significant, serious, and people are planning right now. Denise Reed is with us from the Water Institute of the Gulf. Jarvis DeBerry's here from Times-Picayune and NOLA.com. Tommy Michaud is with us. He's at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. We're going to hear a lot more in this hour. We've got questions from our audience here in New Orleans and from all of you around the country online. We thank you for that. We'll be right back in a moment. I'm Tom Ashbrook. We're in front of a live audience at Le Petit Theater in New Orleans, Louisiana. This is On Point. I'm Tom Ashbrook. We are in front of a live audience at Le Petit Theater in New Orleans, Louisiana, with NPR member station WWNO, and this is On Point. We are talking about America's coastline from the country's ground zero of coastal challenge and response. We've got a lot of questions coming in from the audience here and from around the country online. I'm joined on the stage here on just off Jackson Square, just a long stone's throw from the Mississippi River, by Jarvis DeBerry of Times-Picayune and NOLA.com, Denise Reed of the Water Institute of the Gulf, chief scientist there, and Tommy Michaud, research scientist at the Institute for Coastal Ecology and Engineering at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, also wonderful accordionist in the Cajun band Le Frère Michaud. And here we are, looking at a lot of history, a lot of experience that the whole country is now beginning to turn to more and more and really pay attention to. We were out on the water today, thanks to WWNO and Giannis Giorgio and Mike Brown from the University of New Orleans, who had us out looking at some of the enormous infrastructure that has come up here. We started on Pontchartrain and got on out to Lake Bourne. You have got a surge barrier out there that just is kind of mind-blowing in its scale. Denise Reed, give us a sense. We know this is an organic response, but part of it is just hard steel and cement and a lot of it. Give us a sense of the new infrastructure that has come into this region since Hurricane Katrina that is supposed to be preparing and protecting for the next, if and when it should come. You've got a $50 billion, 50-year plan here. What's begun, Denise? What's been the response?
Well, after Katrina, clearly something had to be done to protect the city, and the federal government came in with billions of dollars. Fortunately, it really is that expensive, and the surge barrier that you saw today is part of that. And it really represents a new way of thinking about how to protect cities like New Orleans against threats that come from the Gulf of Mexico, in the sense that it really responded to how the storm surge comes across the landscape and interacts with the geometry, if you like. And so there's a new, I think it's about 2 miles long, huge structure, cost about $1 billion and was built in record time, that essentially protects that eastern flank of the city. It ties into levees.
Bienvenue out there.
Exactly. And the great thing about it is that it does have structures in to allow Bayou Bienvenue, an historic bayou in New Orleans, to still be there. It doesn't block everything off. It has gates in it that allow that tidal exchange to come in and out. So one of the things about this is we're working in the coast of Louisiana to think about how we can protect the people that really need to be here and keep the city vibrant at the same time as keeping the ecosystem going. So we didn't shut off the Gulf of Mexico. We allowed it to come in, and those gates will only close when there's a storm coming. And so here down in the delta of the Mississippi, we have to do this balancing act between protecting the people with huge structures like those that you saw, while allowing those natural processes, the tides and the fish coming in and out, allowing that to work, because that's really what keeps this great ecosystem going. So we've worked out how to do it in many places, and I think that kind of technology is probably going to be moved elsewhere. Now, of course, the state of Louisiana has come out with a $50 billion plan.
Master plan, 50-year plan.
Absolutely. And for once, if somebody gives Louisiana $1 to spend on coastal protection or restoration, we know where it's going to go. It's going to go to fund the master plan. And so this was put together, a huge effort with 60 or 70 scientists working over several years to come up with what would happen if we do this and what would happen if we do that. And that all came together into a plan which the state legislature passed unanimously. And so now it is the blueprint, if you like, of how we move forward. And so that means that the funds that may come to Louisiana as a result of the oil spill will be used to do that work. And everybody knows what we're going to do with that money. That's not coming in and then we work it out. And so I think this is actually something that very few places have. You look at the other Gulf states that were impacted by the oil spill. They don't have master
Alabama,
plans.
right on across.
Right, exactly. So now questions, what are they going to do with that money? Fortunately, in Louisiana, a little bit ahead of that curve, and now we know what to do. And so we think about Superstorm Sandy. What happens to that area up there now? How do we put a plan in place so that gradually that area can be protected next time something like that happens, because it is going to happen again.
I know there is thinking and planning going on up there, up the eastern seaboard now, across the same kind of zone of concern. Jarvis, do you have the sense that in this century, basically every coastal community region is going to have a long-term master plan for dealing with sea level rise and more severe storms?
I think they have to. You know, events such as Hurricane Katrina are low probability but high risk. You know, I mean, they cause a lot of damage even if they don't happen very often. And so I know it's not something that other jurisdictions want to necessarily think about. I mean, you can't run a campaign. You would not have been able to run a campaign in New Orleans, say in 2004, based on who's going to have the best hurricane evacuation plan.
Right.
You know,
Because it just wasn't an issue.
because it wasn't an issue. Nothing had
then it
happened
was.
since 1965. And so you're not going to be mayor of New York City or governor of New Jersey based on what we're going to do to restore the coast, because that's not anything that somebody is thinking about necessarily. But once something that cataclysmic happens, people wonder, why didn't you have a plan in place, or why didn't you do this? So it is not the sexiest topic in the world. It is not the topic that's going to hold people's attention for the longest time. But if you don't pay attention to it now, then we know what's going to happen.
And when
later.
it comes in hard, it grabs whole populations by the throat. I mean, when Sandy hit, and well inland and well north of New York, you had people absolutely riveted, whole regions devastated, and a new sense of seriousness about this. Tommy Michaud, it's not just steel and cement. The marshlands, the wetlands on the coast are incredibly important as well, and you're losing them at a very rapid clip even now in Louisiana. You're our biologist here. Now, there's earth and there's vegetation there, and there's the flora and fauna. You've got critters and creatures out there that are important in their own right. They're important economically. What about the soft part of the defense of the Louisiana coastline, and what other regions of the country, coastal regions of the country, can learn from how you're grappling with that defense?
Yeah, well, we have a lot of effort goes into the management of our wildlife resources and fisheries, and we have a lot of users out there, both recreational and commercial. The Acadian people are very closely tied to the wetlands. As I said, a lot of people turn to it for their livelihood, and the rest of the people, if they don't make a living by it, they sure enjoy eating the food and the bounty that comes from our wetlands. So it's a huge part of the economic engine that drives this whole state, and especially the southern part of the state, but people from all over the world benefit by it.
Can you protect it in a century of sea level rise? Because I was out there this morning, and it was pointed out to me, where it's receding, where you don't have, because of some of this big infrastructure built upstream, well, along the Mississippi and right here in the Delta, you don't have the sediment coming down that would replenish those marshlands. Now, if you've got sea rise on the one hand and subsidence and retreat on the other of the wetlands, of the marsh, where do you go? Where do you end up?
And I think the key is, like Denise said, you got these barriers, these levees, they protect us, but at the same time, they stop the normal processes of ebb and flow of the tide in and out, water coming down from rainfall, getting into the marsh, tidal water coming back into the upper part of the estuary. So all that has to be accounted for, and we're learning through the decades how to cope with that and live within that and make the most out of living with that and going with that instead of trying to fight it all the time.
Are you succeeding in finding that balance, do you think, Tommy? Or are you still losing that? I mean, people talk about a football-sized chunk lost every, day in Louisiana?
Or hour.
Hour?
But, we're still losing, but it's a hard fight, and it's a piece at a time. But there's not going to be one fix that fixes the whole coast all at one time. It's a lot of smaller projects. But we are making progress, but we're still losing. Yeah, overall, we are losing land.
Denise, in our home base of Boston, there's a lot of conversation around this. I've been part of some of those conversations. People talk about the different approaches to sea level rise and encroachment resistance. That would be walls and cement and steel and levees. And you saw in New York, as soon as Sandy hit, they were talking about, well, should we build a giant gate out in the Verrazano? Retreat, get away from the water. Then there's resilience. Learn to live with it. Maybe let more of the water in a managed way. What about those three? What's the balance here, and will it be different for every coastal region of the country, Denise?
Well, clearly there's no one-size-fits-all. Some things can be moved and probably gradually should be moved over time. I think the idea that somebody has to move overnight as a result of a storm is different from gradually moving over a series of generations. And we're talking about...
people have, and they've done it right here. I mean, I was out in regions that I saw a year after Katrina, nearly abandoned, lots of people back now, but not everybody back, and not full population. That's some retreat right there in New Orleans.
Exactly, and that's
Same in New York now.
That's what's happened. That's
New
what
Jersey.
happens if we don't prepare, and that's what happens in many of these down the bayou communities where people live very close to the wetlands. After a storm, some people give up and move somewhere else, and you gradually start to lose the sense of community. You know, there aren't enough kids anymore to keep the school open, or the church can't be supported, and how long do we keep the road open and keep garbage service and those kinds of things when people are gradually haphazardly moving? We lose that sense of community when it happens like that. And so if we can anticipate that change will occur rather than reacting to it after this specific event and after the extreme things happen, then ultimately we may be able to have a future where we still have some valuable coastal ecosystem, where we can still have viable communities and culture, and we can still have some of those important commercial activities going on. But it takes thinking in advance, not reacting after the event. It's almost too late after Katrina, that was the case in New Orleans, I think, or too late after Sandy to tell people to do something different. You have to kind of wait for the next one and get ready in advance. And as Jarvis said, you know, it's something that you don't know when it's coming. It's difficult for people to kind of keep it on the radar screen when it might happen this year, or it might be another 10 years.
There are people who think about that radar screen a lot. It may not be early enough on the cultural front. You have to take the hit before you feel it and respond.
Right.
But economically, among others, insurance companies are thinking about it all over the country. And right now, we've had hue and cry in all coastal regions where flood insurance in these national flood zones is going up a lot. It's going up all up and down the eastern seaboard. It's going up down here. The economics of just insuring residences and businesses on the coast have their own powerful currents running through them, Jarvis.
It's really outrageous what's happening to people in South Louisiana, even in parts of New York and New Jersey we're hearing, because they did what the government told them to do. They rebuilt their properties according to the government specs that were given to them, and now Congress has since changed the rules. And so their insurance costs may make their homes unlivable and unsellable. They won't be able to afford to stay in them, and they won't be able to sell them to anybody. And so
I mean, we're talking about insurance payments going up. I mean, some of them
3,000%. Yes,
Oh, okay.
I mean we're talking huge, and like astronomical increases. And so I think America really needs to consider some form of catastrophic insurance that will include almost everybody in the country.
Well, make the case for that, because I want to start to bring the rest of the country in here, and we've got listeners from around. Here's Joe who writes, and he's not thinking necessarily of regular neighborhoods or the industry. He's thinking of, big fancy beach houses and insuring those. And he says, kick all the wealthy freeloaders off. Yep, freeloaders, for our taxes pay for their flood insurance. I mean, if you're sitting up on a mountaintop and thinking about that coast and thinking just how serious the threat from sea level rise is and what it may cost to back that up, you may not want to pay for that.
It flooded in Colorado last summer. It's flooded.
Well, that's true.
It flooded in Nashville, Tennessee.
That's true too.
Just a few years ago.
It flooded in the mountains. That's true.
Exactly. So I mean, flooding is the most common natural disaster in the United States, and so I would hope that people would stop seeing it as just solely a Louisiana problem. When they talk about catastrophic insurance, though, I think if you think about the risk that people in California have for earthquakes, or the people in Missouri have for earthquakes, or the possibility that people in Louisiana and Florida and Alabama have for hurricanes, and you can pool all those people somehow into a type of catastrophic insurance, I think that makes our country stronger, and I think it makes the market a lot more stable. I'm sensitive to the arguments of making the flood insurance program market-driven. I just don't think it's going to work. We have to find some way to support those industries that we're talking about, supporting that way of life here that makes America work. If people abandon our coastlines, our whole country is going to shut down.
But if you look at the great economic formula here, does it add up? I mean, Denise, you've said that there's a lot of steel and cement out there that's very costly, and there's much more to come. You've said that, though, part of dealing with the coastal challenges in this century is coming to terms with the limits of engineering. There may be limits to what we can protect, defend. What about it?
Well, I think that that's, if you look at the Louisiana Coastal Master Plan, for example, then it really tries to use the natural processes to the maximum extent possible and try to get the coast kind of working again.
Does it really? I mean, look at all the levees up and down the Mississippi and all the steel and cement right around this city now. Natural processes?
Well, that's the point, is that the Mississippi is essentially isolated from the coastal marshes at the moment. It built those coastal marshes originally. They're not like rocks that you get
And
in
they
Kentucky.
need the sentiment from the river in order to be rebuilt and,
Yeah.
and sustained.
That's how deltas work. I think that's what we learn about deltas in high school, and that's what we learn about deltas in college.
But right
Rivers
there,
build
there's a
them and
lot of
rivers maintain
controversy
them.
about how to do that, whether to pipeline it out there to specific places or open it up more broadly so the sediment can flow out.
Well, that's right, and so there is some difference of opinion about what's the best solution. But really, it isn't about picking this one or that one. The problem in Louisiana is so serious that we just need to throw everything at it. It's not about diversions or dredging or placement. It's really about thinking about all the different things that we can do and trying to get to a point at some stage in the future where our coast is not just going to hell in a handbasket every day. That we actually reach a point where the coast looks different, smaller than it is now, but we've actually kind of got a sustainable state.
What do you mean smaller than it is now? I mean, Louisiana's still going to be here. It's going to have a coast somewhere. You just mean less depth of wetland?
Yeah, I mean, there's no going back. We lost 1,900 square miles of coastal land in the 20th century, and it's not like the land is still there, but it's a golf course or an agricultural field. It's just gone. It's turned to open water. It's not the same kind of wetland loss that you hear about across the rest of the country. And so we have to both rebuild that substrate and get those processes going again that can keep it going in the long run. There's no going back, and the coast of the future is going to look very different from the coast now or the coast of the past. But frankly, that's what it's going to be like around the rest of the country. If you look at South Carolina or Georgia or Miami or the Everglades, they're not going to look like that in 50 years.
Louisiana has already got the big heads up on that. New Orleans has the big heads up. They're planning, they're acting. We're talking about challenges to America's coastline in this hour in a special edition of On Point in front of a live audience at Le Petit Theater in New Orleans, Louisiana. My guest, Tommy Michaud, Denise Reed, Jarvis DeBerry. It's great to have you all here in this wonderful crowd in the hall. We've got more questions on the interests at play here, how what Louisiana and New Orleans have learned may play out across the United States. I'm Tom Ashbrook, live with a live audience in New Orleans, and this is On Point. We'll be right back. I'm Tom Ashbrook. We're in front of a live audience at Le Petit Theater in New Orleans, Louisiana, and this is On Point. It's great to be with everyone here in New Orleans. We are talking this hour about America's coastline from the country's ground zero of coastal challenge and response. Louisiana and New Orleans know a lot about what's happening with sea level, what's happening with the fury of storms. It is knowledge that the rest of the country is going to be able to use in the century ahead. They're a little bit further down that road, and we are trying to learn here with this great crowd here in New Orleans. Tommy Michaud is with us, a biologist. He's up at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette and with us tonight here in New Orleans. Denise Reed is here, chief scientist at the Water Institute of the Gulf in Baton Rouge. And Jarvis DeBerry of New Orleans is here, award-winning columnist, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for the Times-Picayune and NOLA.com. It's great to have all of you with us. We've got questions from here in the hall and around the country. Cassie wants to know if Tommy brought his accordion. Okay, maybe not Zydeco here tonight, but culture itself is woven into this. Tommy, you talked about fishing interests and oyster beds and all the rest. When you start talking about dealing with change on the coast, you run into interests right and left. You've got the interest of residential neighborhoods. You've got the interest of petrochemical industry and all kinds of industry that are right on the coast. If you want to move the water from your neck of the woods, it ends up in somebody else's neck of the woods. If you want to bring down fresh water through those oyster beds to bring sediment with it, that gets into the whole cycle there and the salinity of the water. Here's a question from one of our audience members here in New Orleans. He says, this is Dr. Edward Peters. Thank you, Dr. Peters. Isn't coastal erosion a result of the classic tragedy of the commons, the result of independent interests acting alone and against the group's collective long-term best interests? You can't help but wonder about this. He says, if so, shouldn't the solution be a coordinated yet central public or government-led effort, a national or globally financed effort. Tell me, what about it? Are we ultimately going to have to coordinate this at a level that Americans are not accustomed to coordinating?
Well, that is, I mean, the tragedy of the commons has been brought up. That analogy has been mentioned a lot in relation to the Louisiana wetlands issue. And that is something, there are a lot of different user groups and different interests, the oil and gas industry, the commercial fishermen, and even within the commercial fishermen, you got the oystermen, you got the fin fishermen, then the shrimpers.
Each with a little bit different interest in how this is handled.
And one can affect the other positively or negatively, like freshwater introduction into Lake Pontchartrain through the Bonnie Carey Spillway was one of the alternatives that was offered 20 years ago, and it was actually became the target of a lawsuit by the oystermen because either there or in Carnarvon or freshwater diversion through Davis Pond, but one of them they sued the state to stop the project because of the freshening of the water, which you just mentioned, and the negative effect it would have on the oyster industry as it was, and they won the suit, so that project was stopped. The Bonnie Carey was stopped. But that's just an example of different user groups being affected negatively or positively by proposed actions.
As this challenge gets more at our throats, those interests don't go away, Denise. I mean, it sounds like a classic political kind of Gordian knot where, you know, everyone's afraid to do anything because someone's going to get burned. Everybody protests every significant, especially master plan kind of action. How do you cut through that? How does that happen?
Well, I think the solution here is very much planning ahead and helping for transitions. We talked about flood insurance just now and the idea of aiding people in a transition to a different kind of state or helping them with their flood insurance. The idea that things are going to change in the future if we don't do anything is one of the most important messages here. One of the ways that Louisiana is slightly different from other places around the country is that we, independent of sea level rise or the future, we are currently losing land. So we have a shifting baseline, if you like. If we don't do anything in Louisiana, the situation gets worse.
It's on the move anyway.
Exactly. And so you really have to think about what's going to happen if we don't do anything. Are we still going to have oysters in the same place? Are the shrimp still going to be in the same place? How is that all going to work in the future? And then compare that to what would happen if we actually took various kinds of actions. And so it's not like comparing now to the future. You have to think about what's it going to be like in 50 years if we don't do this compared to what it's going to be like in 50 years if we do it. And so that's actually quite scientifically, you know,
yes.
For somebody like me, you know, that's the kind of thing that I do. But frankly, for a lot of people who live across the coast, most people don't think that far ahead. A lot of people are living paycheck to paycheck to paycheck, or
Sure.
shrimp season to shrimp season.
Sure.
And so I can understand it's very difficult to think that far ahead. But
So how do you cut through that? I mean, these interests keep coming to the table. You can say, well, we're losing land. We've got to do this rationally, but we are creatures of passion. I mean, even in the lifeboats of the Titanic, people were fighting about who's going to be on the boat, right? How do you cut through that? How do you do it here? Is there a table where it comes down to 3, 4, 5, 6 people who just decide and everybody lines up? Or is it a fight all the way to the point of action?
Well, clearly, I think we have to avoid the situation where it's a fight all the way or nothing will happen. And that is the problem that we face. If we fight about it too much and then take no action, then there is no better future for us. And so I do think that to some extent, and this is a kind of strange irony of living in these coastal systems, is that these big events that we suffer, like storms, they're kind of an opportunity to think about doing something different. And the idea that things are going to be different and that we can transition to a different way of doing things. I mean, if you think about other coastal systems, if you think about fisheries, for instance, I mean, you know, we don't catch cod in quite the same places that we did 20 years ago. You know,
don't catch them at all in some places.
Exactly. And so we've kind of adjusted and we've helped people transition out of their industry into another industry, not just left them alone and let them be destitute on the sidewalk, but really provided support and training or whatever to help see a different system. Now, we will have a coast if we do something. There will still be a vibrant ecosystem. And as Tommy can probably relate and has, you know, the people who live here have actually changed their way of life a number of times. They adapt and they change. And as Tommy says, they're resilient and they can cope with change. And so I think we have to remember that and kind of help people adjust, as it were, as opposed to just saying it's my way or the highway.
Jarvis, what have you seen in New Orleans in these years since Katrina? And it's years now, 2005.
Yeah.
Have people loosened up? Have they come to see or understand that they've got to hold their own very personal self-interest a little more loosely in their hand for everybody, for the whole community to succeed? Or do you see fight, fight, fight as the changes are laid down that may advantage one interest or party more than another?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, I think the activism in New Orleans and Louisiana after Katrina was remarkable and very much appreciated and very effective in getting a lot of change done. You know, even our little system that we had of little petty individual levee boards was changed, and so now we have and we have 2 major levee boards in the region. Speaking of levee boards, one of them has recently sued Big Oil in Louisiana. I see that.
Wow, the passion in the hall in New
Meets
Orleans
with-
around this. But
meets
I know
with
that's
great
been
approval.
controversial.
Great approval by the people here, although it's controversial in the sense
Well, not
that
here.
in the sense that the governor and his administration have opposed it.
Why?
And
Why? Because they don't want to put that tax in effect on oil companies?
well, I have to confess that I'm very unclear as to what the governor's opposition is. It seems to be a certain genuflection before the big oil industry that I don't think is warranted. If the oil is here, they're going to be here. And I think, you know, we have to acknowledge that they're coming here not because they like us. They're coming here not because we treat them sweetly and talk very politely. They're coming here because the oil is here. And so I don't think that they're going to go away, you know, out of spite or go away out of anger. And I think they do need to be made to pay for the damage that they've caused.
Maybe they will. Okay. We got support in the hall for that. Of course, you know, everybody would like somebody to pay for it, ideally somebody else to pay for it. In some ways, when the rest of the country looks at you all down here, they're going to think, well, you've had your bad luck with Katrina and the BP spill. On the other hand, that BP spill and the compensatory money that has come in and will come in is a big part of how you're paying for these things. I've heard conversations elsewhere in the country about major actions needed along the coast, and the big question is, who's going to pay for that? You've got already money from BP that's come in, and more will come, Denise. There's a source for, for this area to do big things along its coast. How's the rest of the country going to pay for that thing if they don't have oil money to, let's say, tap or tax or sue?
Well, that's a very good point, Tom, and I think that the more that we can understand the value of our coastal systems and how our values in the 21st century are really about clean environments and engaging with nature, and a lot of people value that. And I think we have to think through.
But we're talking billions here. Even for you, you're talking 50 billion, and you've just got to start on that. Maybe you'll tax oil companies more. You've got that resource here. How do others do it? Where do you actually go for the money to get these things, these big plans done?
Well, frankly, where I live down in Terrebonne Parish, we've started taxing ourselves in order to pay for a levee system. We have no hurricane protection where I live. My house is 10 feet off the ground. I know how inconvenient that is, and I know that I still pay flood insurance.
Groceries up the stairs.
Absolutely, and 5-gallon jugs of water. It's something else. But we have decided that we need to have some level of hurricane protection where I live, and so we are paying a sales tax. And the people where I live have voted twice to impose a sales tax on themselves. So there's a certain amount of self-help. I think that's very much the kind of down-the-wire way of doing things, and we're not going to be able to pay for it all. But we're going to have to find ways of leveraging other sources of money. The coastal systems are very important. People want to live at the coast. We've got to find innovative ways of getting some financing there to support these important coastal systems and kind of rectifying some of the things we did during the 20th century. We did lots of things. We had a different value system then during the 20th century. Now we think these things are more important. And frankly, if they're important to us as a country, we're going to have to pay for them somehow.
There's some self-reflection here. People also looking at other purses from their own to pay at the same time. Tommy, a question here. John in the hall asks, how much is known about the role of subsidence, especially as caused? The wetlands are not only being eroded, but they're actually subside, sinking, and how much of that could be caused, John asked, by oil and gas extraction? Yeah, I guess we're talking, what, extraction right
Yeah,
along the coast?
well, the concept is they pull oil and gas out from, say, 200 or 2,000 feet below the surface, and everything above that sinks because there's nothing holding it up. That's the concept. So, I mean, that definitely does occur, more so perhaps in East Texas and places like that near Houston. Studies have shown that it's not a huge factor here, but it is a factor. It's a potential. And there are some other parts of the geology that affect our subsidence rates and faults and other natural features in the landscape. And the subsidence rate varies a good bit throughout coastal Louisiana. It's highest near the Mississippi River Delta, and it's lower further to the west.
So it may be a factor.
Yes, but a small factor.
Of course, every few inches counts when the sea level's rising. Here's another question from the hall, and this gets right down to it. Denise, the question is, if the rate of coastal erosion cannot be stopped, how do we, as New Orleanians, think about and plan for our future?
Well, New Orleans is in a very precarious position if we can't do anything about the coastal system around it. And the idea of New Orleans being an island at some point in the future is something that we want to stop at all causes. The idea that there should be some wetland apron around the city, I think, is very viable. A lot of parallels between New Orleans and Venice. You think of that as a sinking city surrounded by water. We need to do everything we can to not get ourselves into that kind of situation. We know that we have resources that we can use. And I don't mean money here. I mean sediment and water. We know that we've got the 6th largest river in the world sitting on our doorstep. And
Bringing you that sediment.
And if we don't even try and use that to prevent that island scenario for the city, then more shame on us, frankly. I mean, I think there are some good ideas out there about things that can be done. And if we just want to walk away from this system and walk away from the culture and walk away from the great city of New Orleans, then we're going to be walking away from Miami. We're going to be walking away from lower Manhattan. We're going to be walking away from lower parts of San Francisco and Oakland. That's just the beginning of it. So let's draw the line here and let's do what we can in New Orleans. We know we've got some tools at our disposal. Let's use them.
It's a message of resilience out of New Orleans. I have to say the city's looking pretty spiffy right now, but we know trouble can come again. We know the challenges are still growing here and around the country. The insights you shared with us right here on this stage with this wonderful crowd in New Orleans are terrific, and I want to thank all three of you for that. Denise Reed, Chief Scientist at the Water Institute of the Gulf. Thank you, Denise, for being with us.
Thanks very much, Tom.
Tommy Michaud at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. Wonderful to have you with us. Thank you so much, Tommy.
Thank you.
And Jarvis DeBerry, award-winning columnist for the Times-Picayune and NOLA.com. Thanks to you all.
Thank you.
Just great to be with you here. To everyone in the hall, thanks very much. We've been talking about America's coast from New Orleans. Thanks to WWNO. I'm Tom Ashbrook. This is On Point. Thank you so much for that. I'm sure people will listen very closely. You got all of our attention with Katrina, and you've had it ever since with BP. You guys know how to do high drama down here. But you're clearly thinking about it with a seriousness and a depth that the whole country can learn from. Tommy, Denise, Jarvis, thank you so much for doing this with us. Thank you. Thank you, Tommy. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Denise. Thank you. Thank you, Jarvis. Thank you so much. Tommy Michaud, Denise Reed, Jarvis DeBerry, thank you very much. That's just terrific. That's just great. So that's how we do it. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of work. We do it with a great staff in Boston. We're happy to do it when we can get out into the field. Was it interesting to see it in the flesh? We get a little time to spend together, and I'm happy to do it. If anybody in the hall has questions about this issue or any issue you've heard about on Point or how we put the show together on NPR, you name it, we're happy to entertain those right now. I'm so happy to be with you tonight. It's just terrific. We've got microphones here in the hall. If you want to chat, put your hand up. I'm here and love to do it. So do we have a question from the hall? Yes, sir.
This is a technical question.
Okay.
About
levees?
You seem to be very, very well versed in what questions were going to be asked, what topics were going to be discussed. Do you do any kind of rehearsal before the show actually starts with your guests?
Absolutely not. I mean, tonight, you know, this is a case where I'm here in the flesh, and they're here in the flesh, and so we're chatting before we get started. But it's a very general conversation. More typically, I've got, let's say, a guest, you know, somebody from Kabul or Baghdad, and I've got somebody else in Los Angeles and somebody else in Washington, D.C., and it is extremely rare that I share a single word with them before we go on the air. Having said that, you know, a show like this takes a lot of resources to put together. We've got a staff of 10 or a dozen up in Boston. I've got great producers up there. And, you know, they have spoken with the guests before we go on the air. We don't go into a show like this just blindly. We think about what's our framing? How do we want to come at this issue? And they will have shared that with the guest. Here's our general approach. Or here's the question that we're going to be pursuing. And they will do a pre-interview with them. So I'm sitting here, right here, with notes that my producer has given me from talking with Tommy and Denise and Jarvis before we're here tonight. So I kind of know, I've got a baseline understanding of what they are bringing to the table that I hope to mine in the course of the hour. And the other thing that sort of sets the path here is my producers put together a lot of background research that I constantly inhale, so that when I sit down to do the interview, I have a very deep packet of stuff that I've read already that's kind of guiding where we're headed. There's no set list of questions. I'm just kind of brimming with information about the topic and an angle of approach that we know we're going to take, and from that, the whole show flows, if that makes any sense. Questions? Up top, down here. Do we have them? Yes, right here. Oh, that's a great question. Yes, I was in print for many years. I started out, my first job as a newspaper reporter at the South China Morning Post in Hong Kong many years ago, and that was just terrific. You know, it was way back when China was still closed. You had to look across the water with binoculars to see China. That was it. The refugees were still coming up from Vietnam, and I loved print. I loved newspapering. But a couple things happened. One was called the internet, which in the 90s I saw was going to bring woe to the newspaper after a period that was very deep gravy, very profitable. And so I headed out. The fact is, I also had at a certain point in my 40s, I guess, I had a kind of a swoon on the whole undertaking. I had been doing a string of reports from the Balkans in the war there in Bosnia and beyond, out of Rwanda in the aftermath of the genocide there. And one day I was in Somalia, in Mogadishu. This was when the UN was finally just pulling out, and the Americans were long gone. It was a total mess. And just to get from the airport, which was a little strip on the beach surrounded by tons and tons of barbed wire to keep the chaos out, and to get to the hotel where I was staying, I had to hire 3 cars with gunmen in the front car, gunmen in the back car, gunmen in my car with me to sort of race through the gates into this hotel. And then on another day, that same convoy, we were going out to talk with a warlord out on the boondocks of Mogadishu. It was very hot. We drove past the Black Hawk Down spot in Mogadishu where the big chopper blades off the helicopter that went down were still lying there next to the street. And it just took us forever to get past all the buildings just shot to pieces, and the streets littered with chunks of buildings and the detritus of war. I fell asleep, and I woke up with this smooth, cool feeling on my cheek through the window in the back of the car. I thought, oh, that's so nice. What is that cool? And I woke up, and it was the business end of a rocket-propelled grenade that a guy, you know, did you see Captain Phillips? I am the captain. Well, it was a guy kind of like that who was just nudging me awake with the business end of this RPG. And I thought to myself, you know, I got 3 little kids at home. And I got into journalism with the idea that when you lay the facts out, then you make progress. But after quick trips to the Balkan War and to Rwanda and Somalia, I thought, maybe not. Maybe it just goes in circles. And between those two things, for a while, I just checked out completely. And then when this call, it was 9/11 that brought me back into radio. This is just a couple days, 3 days after 9/11. WBUR, which is a very big public radio station in Boston, got a call from NPR Central, and they said, look, we need fresh horses. People have been working 24 hours around the clock. They're just out of juice. Do you have anybody who could help us out? And they called me in and they said, Tom, we know you're a journalist who hasn't been doing journalism, because I'd gone off and done some internet entrepreneurship, and where are those millions now? And had written a book about it, and I was actually writing a second book, and they said, look, it's kind of an emergency. Could you help us out here? I said, sure, what do you need? And they said, could you go, I'd never done radio before. They said, could you come in and host a show? Could you go on the air 3 hours a night live on 500 stations starting tomorrow? I thought, holy crap, what did I just say yes to? But, you know, to your question, it did not take me long to realize, first of all, the urgency of 9/11 smacked me back awake and said, you know what? You cannot give up on this process of learning and informing, because that is the only hope we have of coming to grips with the big problems we have as a country and as a nation. There cannot be an end to that. And secondly, I had this kind of rebirth in a whole new medium that I found I absolutely loved. There's something about, here we don't have it here, but in the studio there's a big red light. And when that red light goes on, you're on, and it's live, and we're not taped, and there's no redos. You know, I envy Terry Gross, because there's such wonderful interviews, but they're taped, and she can cut out all the stuff that doesn't quite work out. Whatever we do, it's live and it's on the air, and what you hear is what you get. What we say is what you get. But I found that kind of thrilling in this sort of Buddhist be here now way. You know, it's whatever it is, it's going to be now. And I don't know, I just fell in love with it. I still love it a dozen years later, and you can feel the hunger of Americans for it, and that is very potent and powerful fuel. And I think I'm just going to go the distance with it if I can, if you all keep supporting it. Thank you. Do we have more? Do we have a question in range of a microphone? Yeah, yeah, up top. Okay, yeah.
I'm just really curious how far in advance you pick the topics, and how flexible you are to suddenly respond to something. Is it something that piques your interest, or is it your producers, or what?
Yeah, how far in advance we choose the topics, and what about our readiness to change? Let's see. Every day right after the show, we have a staff meeting, a news meeting, where we think about what we're going to be doing ahead. And usually that morning before the show, we've made our final decision on what we're doing the next day. Most of our shows, the majority, are chosen just 24 hours in advance of going to air, especially for the first of our 2 hours, which tends to be newsier if you follow the show 2 hours. And by the way, we love our New Orleans callers. Please never stop. We love it when you call on the air. It's just great. You've got your neurology pre-med student, Panina something, who calls in. She's got these great thoughts. You know, I love it. We love it. When it's New Orleans, I say, hey, put that call up. I like New Orleans. Because I can do that. You know, I got the power in there. But most of it's just 24 hours in advance. Some things are longer, like, I don't know. Maya Angelou's coming out with some new work, and we want to have her on the air. And so, okay, we've got that booked for 2 weeks from now. And that'll be in the second. I will try not to move that. But most of it is, okay, here we are. It's now. What are people really going to care about tomorrow? Because we know the bar's being raised. You know, people's attention spans are not getting longer. They may be getting shorter. We want to bring real heft and insight, but we want to bring it when people really care about it. So what is it? What's the subject that if we talk about it in depth and seriously tomorrow, people will really pay attention to? So it's a pretty short turnaround. The lucky thing there for us is that when NPR calls and asks a guest to come on, they almost always say yes, because they know it's a great audience that will pay attention. They know they'll have lots of national exposure, and for that matter, more and more global. I mean, we looked, the last time I checked in the last quarter, we had listeners, and these days when you can listen online, coming to our website from 160 countries around the world. There are only like 180 countries in the world, right? So people are listening all over the place. So when we call and say, we know it's a short turnaround, but could you clear your schedule and come on tomorrow to talk about whatever it may be, people are very likely to say yes. And that is also a tribute to all of you because they know you're listening and they want to reach you. So this formula is working and it's precious. But that's kind of the turnaround. Some things maybe a couple weeks out, some things a few days out, most things tomorrow. What are we going to do? And then are we willing to change? We will change. We have changed as late as 5 minutes before showtime. Now that's unusual. And it gives us all palpitations a little bit. And, you know, there are times when I don't know who my guests are going to be until this clock is counting down to 30 seconds to airtime. And Dean says in my ear, we've got so-and-so in New York. And I say, we've got so-and-so in New York, as though we've had them booked, you know, for half our lives. But we haven't always. We try to make it look seamless. Sometimes it's not so seamless, but that's how we do it. Yes.
Hi, Tom. I've spent my whole life being a teacher trying to excite people about the environment. And tonight you did a great show about stuff that's not so sexy.
Well, excuse me. But thank you.
It's the coast. And we try to change behavior in what I do. And you have this incredible forum. Do you think either one of us can do it?
Can we change behavior as teachers or as broadcasters? Well, that's the question that I entertained on that back alley in Mogadishu all those years ago. And at that moment, I thought, I'm not sure, and I kind of give up. But you can't give up. And more than that, if you look at human behavior over long periods of time, we do change. You know, it's not just a perfect vertical slide to hell in a handbasket. It's a bumpy road, and there are times when we drift down, and there are times when we drift up. So I guess the honest answer is, you know, in any given period of time, I don't know. And by that I mean a day or a week or a month or even my lifetime and yours. But it gets to a philosophical question, which is, over time, are we going to try? Over time, are we going to have faith that we can make things better? If we can't do it in our lifetime, are we going to model for our children the belief and that hope that we can change and that if we think about it hard enough, we will change? Because if they see us just give up, are they going to give up too? And then, so I guess, yes, I believe we can. Over what time frame? Don't ask me to define it. And beyond that, it is faith and hope and modeling for our kids that whether we figure it out right now or not, they will have seen us trying. Maybe not all of us, but they'll see you trying in front of that classroom. And maybe they'll hear me trying on the air. And maybe if we don't get it fixed in our lifetime, you know, it's a kind of a baton pass of hope and faith. And that just gets down to really personal things, but I'd rather lean toward hope and faith than the other way. So I do. Does that make sense, teacher man? Okay, all right. He's not quitting either. Good, good. Yes, up top.
So NPR has this reputation of being calm and educating and wide-ranging, and here in New Orleans, we like to have a good time. So my question goes in a complete different direction. How crazy are those NPR holiday parties?
Yeah. You ought to see Robert Siegel when he gets the lampshade, and the president passes him a doobie. And Terry Gross when she just gets all crazy. Actually, not too crazy, but that smooth kind of NPR quality, there are times when I absolutely love it. And I've been drawn to it for years. I've been listening for years. There are other times when I thought to myself, you know what? The issues are big enough and they're challenging enough. And not everybody in this country is a tea party attender. I mean like a dinner party, like a God, all the language has changed. You can't even say Tea Party anymore. It means something different now. What I mean is, a lot of people want to let it rip, and they're used to commercial media having a whole lot of excitement and a lot of pizzazz and a lot of highly volatile conversation. Now, do I want to become, one of those really wild screamers? No, but I try at on point. I want you to feel the seriousness of it. I want it to have all the depth that a subject requires, but I'm willing to get a little head up sometime, a little more head up than Robert Siegel might. I'm willing to engage with callers when they call in a respectful, but to tangle a little bit with them in a respectful, I suppose, NPR way. Huh? Is that good? Okay. But I try, and I don't want it to be bloodless. I'm not trying to make it just as smooth as silk all the time. The issues aren't smooth. Our own feelings about them aren't smooth. Our own thinking about them isn't smooth. We don't agree with one another, and we damn well know that. So, yeah, overall, NPR is pretty even-keeled. I try to let it rock and roll a little more. You may not think I'm too wild and crazy enough for your party, but a little more than the NPR average, and I think there's a place for that. If it's going to be anywhere, let it be in a talk show where you're trying to encourage and excite people to come in with their idea and lay it out, whatever it may be, and then respond with some seriousness to it. So, oh yeah, those holiday parties, they're just crazy. We all end up naked and bloody and just, woohoo! But somehow we survive. I don't know, there's a balance in there somewhere. Too much balance, maybe. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
You already just answered half my question.
Oh, boy.
But that's great. You get callers, and frequently they do come in with some wacky or extreme stuff, and you're wonderful at, first of all, controlling them and keeping their time down, and then rephrasing what they have to say, and keeping it civil, yet keeping it edgy, a little bit edgy. Where did you learn that? Do you have a mentor or a philosophical background that it's a real art that you have?
Oh, well, hey, I'm an artist. I didn't know that, but I take it. Well, I'll speak to that. I mean, you say control. The time, yes, because with the show, my number one thing I'm always thinking about, and remember, there's always a clock. Always in radio, there's a clock. And I'm always thinking about value per minute, because there are a lot of things people could be doing other than listening to our show. And I don't, I'm very sensitive to, like, if you go for minute after minute and someone's blabbering on and it's not making any sense, it's not getting to any point, there's no impact to it, it's no, I don't want that. So if it's from a guest, I will very respectfully, I do interrupt. If it's from a caller, I'll definitely interrupt. But I try and do it in a respectful way and not in a controlling way, in that I am sincerely listening for the heart of what it is that they have to say that may be of value to all the listenership. In the rephrasing, if I do that, I'm not trying to change what they're asking or I'm trying to acknowledge it. I'm trying to recognize it in a succinct way and get it out there. And yet, yeah, that I do try and do. I mean, I think, look, it's public radio, so it is, in a very literal sense, theirs. And I try always to be respectful, because we want to draw callers and listeners from across every spectrum. We've got Nobel Prize winners, and we've got truck drivers, and I love them all. And it's not an accident that I love them all. I mean, I grew up on a a little house on the prairie, nothing fancy at all. The first time I went out to the East Coast, I went on I wanted to go out and just see that world and think about colleges out there. My parents said, that's great, but the crop prices weren't too good this year. How are we going to get you out there? And I said, we got to. My mom said, well, I've got a friend who works at the stockyards in Peoria, which is a big city from where I came, and let me see what I can do. So she called him up, and they drove me over there. This is an old high school classmate of hers. And they threw me up in the cab of a semi-trailer truck full of hogs headed for the slaughterhouse in Philadelphia. And that truck ride is how I first came to the East Coast. So I know truck drivers, and I know people who don't have a lot and who, have to sort of stitch it together. And I don't just respect them. I mean, I feel of them. And there's too much in our culture and economy now that makes some very high and some very low. And I don't like it, because I started modest, very modest myself, and I want everyone to feel the respect that I think a citizen deserves, and of the feeling that we're in this together, and the feeling that, you know, their views are important because they're a part of this country and they're a full part of this country. And where did I don't know where it all came from. I think, honestly, a lot of it, I grew up very deep in the church. It was the church before it became kind of angry and so thunderous. It was a very loving, I mean, I grew up almost Amish, literally. There, where, you know, there was a lot of, the farmers all helped each other. We all, you know, baled hay together and walked beans together. And it was a very loving kind of community. And I guess maybe right there, it had that kind of Midwestern thing where you show respect to people. And it's not easy to shake off once you're raised with it. And maybe that some of that's still in my backpack. I don't know, somewhere in that neck of the woods. You got more? Something up here? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so this sort of piggybacks on these last couple questions as well, but despite a commitment towards objectivity, NPR has this reputation for having a very liberal bias.
What?
I'm talking about the reputation. And your callers are from a wide range of opinions. And what do you attribute to this? Do you think that it's, I mean, is it just this natural interest in all different peoples and respect for their opinions that you were just talking about? Or is there something more active that you're doing to continue to foster this?
I don't know the answer to that exactly, except when we came on the air after 9/11, we felt like, you know, this is an emergency, and we can't respond to this from any particular, we can't respond in a partisan way. We need everybody thinking about it. And then you look around at what's everything going on in the world, and you think, you know what? We really have to hear from everybody. We need everyone's input. So we actively decided very early on that we wanted On Point to sound like a place that was open to everybody. We wanted the biggest tent that NPR could possibly pitch. We wanted to pitch it right here because we need everybody in. I mean, I also, you know, I grew up in a very conservative Republican part of the country, so conservative people are not strangers to me. They're my cousins, you know. They're my dad. I mean, my dad sits in that little house in the prairie, listens to me for 2 hours every day, and then switches right to Rush Limbaugh. So I'm thinking about, you know, my cousins and my beloved sister-in-law, you know, who it's Christian rock. It's Fox News on the TV in her kitchen, and it's Christian rock in the bathroom. And they never go off. I mean, they're on all the time. But I love her. And I may not agree with her politically on everything, but I know that in her heart and in her mind, she wants the best for this country. So I want to be open to those people. They're my people, plus a whole lot of liberals who I live with in Boston. But they're all, I mean, I know them all. There may be something tonal because of that my background. There's certainly maybe a tone that comes from intent, because our intent is to make the biggest tent we can and to show respect when people call in, even if we don't agree. That doesn't mean bow down, roll over, don't question. No, I'll challenge things that seem like nonsense from whatever angle, but I want everybody to feel welcome, and we try very hard to do that. If you hear some of that, I'm really glad. Thank you. How are we doing? One more? Yeah.
Hi, I wanted to say I listen to the show every single day, and I'm so excited to be here.
I love you.
And when my dear friend invited me to come with him, I thought on the way, I talked to my neighbors, and no one owns a radio except for an actual radio. I like listening to baseball on the radio, and I think it's a dying medium in general, and I wonder if you had any considerations as to...
This will not be the last question, perhaps. Oh, maybe it will.
As to if you think it's in any way going to sadly go in the way of a lot of newspapers. And also, I'm just so impressed with the breadth and the depth and the widely varied range of guests. I mean, when I listened to that interview recently with basketball player, I'm blanking, the basketball player from the Lakers, and then 2 days later, it's Edward Snowden, and it's just phenomenal. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. That's what.
Yeah, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
And
yeah.
I wondered if you had any recent favorites, because every time I listen, I just flick it on and I know it's something I'm going to enjoy, and it's incredible.
Oh, well, thank you for that. And favorites, I don't know. I mean, I love so many. We're so lucky to be able to attract such great guests. And yes, I love that diversity. I like to think about a listener just like you, who, if indeed you're listening every day, I say to my team all the time, you know, we've got to have this great range, because think if you're going to listen every day and you have a lively mind of parts and different regions and different interests, so let's like try and touch all of that. So we try and range widely and interestingly. Is radio a dying medium? Here, now remember, I've done newspapers and I've done radio. I feel a lot more comfortable in radio. Will it always be broadcast? That's another question. But will people always be drawn to the sound of the human voice intimately in their ear, talking to them about interesting things, you know, with the murmurs of emotion and excitement running through it, with that just kind of, that tactile satisfaction of the vibration of a human voice, with ideas running through it, you know, which may be challenging or maybe distasteful or maybe bring you humor, make you laugh. I think that the human voice is endlessly appealing to human beings. And whether it's broadcast or whether it's a voice coming out of an internet connection, I think people are always going to tune into it. I mean, look at, you know, NPR's listenership has grown and grown, even in a time when there's challenges. Are people always going to want to have a newspaper on the front, you know, walk where it may be soggy and dirty? Yes, right there. Well, we know the answer to that. It's already shown. Many are not. But, you know, they're finding new ways to go with text online. I don't have to stand up for text anymore. I love reading and text, and I'll always follow it. But I think the human voice is always going to be appealing to people, and if we fill it with enough intelligence and passion and compassion, I think people will come and listen to it. And so far, that's certainly proving out for On Point. Is that good? Are we good? All right. Thank you for listening. Thank you. Thank you very much for coming out tonight. It's been so great to be with you. WWNO, you rock. Paul, thank you very much. Thank you to everybody here tonight. Love you, New Orleans. Keep calling. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Good night. Thank you very much.